The war in Ukraine has been dragging on for 1600 days. To put that into perspective, that's longer than Nazi Germany's war against the Soviet Union. And the worst part is, as of summer 2026, there's no end in sight. But why is that? In this video, I'll give you the 3 main reasons why the war in Ukraine is almost impossible to end. By the way, I'm making this video right from the Donetsk region. I'm literally in the epicenter of these events, living through it every day, so you can trust my perspective on what's really happening here. Let's start with the obvious. The Russian regime is terrified of a scenario where their own people don't see the outcome of this war as a victory. Even the full power of the Kremlin's propaganda machine won't be enough to explain the average Russian citizen why the fighting stopped without capturing the entire Donbas. But why are they so obsessed with this piece of land in eastern Ukraine? Let me explain. Ever since the regime started its illegal expansion back in 2014, Donbas has been the centerpiece of Russian state news. For 12 years, propaganda has woven it into the Russian national myth, and those efforts have paid off. Today, in the Russian public mind, Donbas is way more than just a resource-rich region. It's a trophy for which tens or even hundreds of thousands of their countrymen have died. To them, it's a ticket back into the superpower club, a symbol of their reviving empire. It's their ultimate proof that they have the right to a sphere of influence and can stand toe-to-toe with the global rivals. The propaganda did its job too well, and now they can't just roll it back. A huge part of the Russian population is so heavily invested in this idea that they won't forgive the government if it tries to cut a ceasefire deal before taking the western part of Donbas, which is still firmly under Ukrainian control. Stopping at the current front line would be seen as a national humiliation and a total betrayal. It would crush Putin's approval ratings and ruin the core of his legitimacy. That's why he feels he has absolutely no choice but to keep pushing forward, no matter how catastrophic the losses are. From a purely military standpoint, attacking the heavily fortified Donbas area is madness. To capture those last few thousand square kilometers, they will have to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives. But for the Kremlin, military logic takes a backseat to political survival. They've made a hard political decision to keep attacking. They will only stop when their economy completely runs out of breath. Right now, Russia's only hope is that Ukraine runs out of people before Russia runs out of offensive power. And Ukraine's only hope is that the enemy's economy dies before we run out of people. But Donbas isn't the only reason this war is still dragging on. Ukraine is critically dependent on Western support, and the Kremlin believes that they can simply outweigh the West, holding on until friendly governments come to power and cut off that aid. For example, Donald Trump's election was a massive gift to the Russians. He blocked American aid and sparked a massive escalation with Iran in the Middle East, which sent oil prices through the roof and brought a huge wave of petrodollars straight to Moscow. Now, the Russians are hoping for a similar scenario in Europe. Next year, we have major elections coming up in France and Poland. In both countries, far-right populist forces could take power. Forces that openly want to break European unity, drop sanctions, and stop weapons deliveries to Ukraine. By the way, these populist parties love to claim that they are for ending the war as quickly as possible through negotiations. Let's be real, this is pure, baseless populism. Over the past year, everyone should have realized how this actually works. Russia has never negotiated in good faith. They have used every single round of talks purely as a distraction, a trick to delay new sanctions and give their populist friends in the West political talking points. For negotiations to have even a slight chance of success, there has to be real leverage. For example, if the Kremlin doesn't agree to a ceasefire on the current front line right here and now, tougher sanctions will immediately hit them, or Ukraine will get a game-changing new type of weapon. This is the only way a deal could even work. The third reason why the war drags on might seem a bit counterintuitive. The Russian leadership is terrified of ending it because they aren't sure the economy can survive the transition back to peacetime. Let me explain. Russia's economy managed to withstand the initial shock of 2022 largely thanks to massive government spending and the rise of a new class of wartime profiteers. People who used to scrape by on 300 euros a month are now making thousands working in military factories or tens of thousands by signing military contracts. Soldiers' families are buying cars and taking out mortgages, pumping taxes back into the budget and keeping local businesses alive. For many of them, this war brought the highest standard of living they've ever experienced. But what happens to this artificial economic model when the war stops? Suddenly, millions of high-paying jobs in the military-industrial complex will vanish, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers will return home to a blank space. Where do they go? Russia's civilian sector is currently suffocating under a record-high central bank interest rate meant to keep inflation down. Regular businesses cannot expand or hire people when borrowing money is painfully expensive. On top of that, millions of citizens have taken out massive loans based on their temporary wartime salaries. Once that money dries up, the credit bubble will burst. Stopping the government's trillion-ruble injections won't just bring peace. It will trigger an economic collapse, and that's a domestic nightmare the Kremlin is desperate to avoid. To wrap things up, the war continues today simply because Russia refuses to stop it. Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire along the current front line a long time ago, but the Russians want to keep fighting because they believe they will eventually win a war of attrition. As I said earlier, they will keep pushing until their economy completely runs out of breath. Ukraine understands this perfectly. That's why, over the last few months, we have heavily focused on destroying Russian oil refineries. Right now, this is the most effective way to cripple the economy and trigger out-of-control inflation. However, our resources alone aren't enough to inflict the kind of irreversible damage that would force them to halt. Right now, the fate of this war lies in Western capitals. The Russians will only stop when the risks of continuing the war become higher than the economic and political risks of ending it. And the only things that can bring this moment closer are tougher Western sanctions and more Western weapons.